Today we're going to be talking about Chapter 2, the pervasive attack surfaces and controls. So, by the end of this module, you should be able to define what's called social engineering and list the different types of attacks, list the different types of physical defenses, and describe controls for protecting data. So let's start off with social engineering is a means of eliciting information or convincing a user to take action that weakens security. In a little bit, we'll talk about concepts like phishing attempts and things like that. It's basically trying to get some information from an individual and compromising them somehow, like usernames, passwords, other information like mother's maiden name, date of birth, things like that. And it's usually performed through deception. That's another most important part, because they're obviously not going to freely give out their username, password, credit card number, mother's maiden name. So it's said to be accomplished by using human vectors as the attack surface. So they're actually attacking the human. So some examples of human manipulation are basically relying on human psychology. So you might see this sale is limited for, it's just good for today only. So you have to buy this product, and you can see a countdown timer, 15 minutes, 14 minutes, and so on and so forth. Or your account has been compromised. Please log in here and verify your information. They're asking the user or the target they're providing them a reason why they should do this. And they usually project confidence. We're certain that your account has been compromised, or that this sale is only good for a limited time. And they'll oftentimes use evasion and diversion. And sometimes they'll make them laugh. If you ever look at in the psychology, the best way to quote disarm someone is to make them laugh. They'll be thinking about the thing that made them laugh and not so much focusing on their individual security or safety. So phishing, spelled with a P, is sending out an email message or displaying a web announcement, falsely claiming to be from a legitimate source, an attempt to trick the user into taking an action. This is usually a preface from most of all the spam mail that everyone gets nowadays. The variations on phishing attacks include the following: spear phishing, whaling, vishing, and smishing. Spear phishing is like targeting a specific group. Whaling is where you're capturing a big user or a user that has like the leader of a group or like a president of a group. Vishing and then smishing. All of them are like variations of these attacks. So a type of phishing attack is a business email compromise that takes advantage of electronically making payments or transferring funds. Later on, we'll talk a little bit about what's called ransomware. Okay, so the requests for funds appear to come from that legitimate source. The phishing is considered to be one of the largest and most consequential cyber threats facing both enterprises and consumers. Because with the ease of sending out bulk emails or targeting certain individuals, it's really easy for an attacker to just target them. So here's an example of BEC phishing, email message. You see you have an invoice, looks like a legitimate invoice, generated date, looks like Norton 360 protection, and looks like they have a very big amount here. If you look, it's hard to see, but you focus on that. That's over $1,500. I'm sorry, strike $500, my bad. And this is a fraudulent email. This is a fraudulent email. Social engineering impersonation is masquerading as a real or fictitious character and then playing out the role that person is on a target. Maybe you might get an email that looks like it's coming from your bank, or PayPal, or eBay, or Amazon, or your credit card company. This is where we get to the next one where you have this type of impersonation is called brand impersonation. The threat actor pretends in order to build immediate recognition and trust. Well, yeah, you trust your bank. Yeah, you trust PayPal. So then what they'll often do is they'll use what's called redirection. When the attacker redirects a user to a fake look-alike site filled with ads or things for which the attacker receives money for traffic generated to that site. And so there are two types of redirections. They're known as type squatting and farming, P-H-A-R-M-I-N-G. The idea with this attack is misinformation is false or inaccurate information, and disinformation is false or inaccurate information that comes from a malicious intent. An example of a cyber disinformation might be a hoax or a false warning. Okay, again, like, your account is ready to be suspended, or you're past due, or this invoice must be paid within, 5 days, or whatever the case might be. A watering hole attack is directed toward a smaller group of specific individuals, such as maybe the major executives working for a manufacturing company or whatever. And these executives all tend to visit a common website that an attacker may try to infect with malware. Say, for instance, at a grander scale, maybe, I hope this never happens, say somebody infects the YSU portal. So then all the students that go to that YSU portal, the YSU portal, student portal, or even the faculty portal, would then get infected with whatever that malware that's on there. That's a watering hole attack. So they're attacking the website, not the individual, because they know the people are going to go to that particular website. You also have, and this is an few extra interesting concepts. This first one, dumpster diving, involves digging through trash receptacles to find information that can be useful in an attack. So that means someone's going to get up, they're going to have their breakfast, and then they're going to put on their coveralls, and they're going to go to work, diving into the dumpsters, looking for discarded pieces of information that might have things like a name, address, city, state, zip. Okay. And remember, things that someone needs to steal your identity or your information include those things. And so oftentimes we discard a magazine or junk mail in the physical mail, but that still has our information on there. You should always shred those things. Don't just throw them in the trash can. You should always shred those things. Google Dorking uses an advanced Google search technique that to look for information that unsuspecting victims have carelessly posted on the web. A lot of times people want to post their information. Hi, I am Bob. I'm from, say, Youngstown. My hobbies are X, Y, and Z. I belong to these groups and clubs. These are my hobbies. So on and so forth. I'm out of my house every third Wednesday at XYZ event, and so on and so forth. Well, some thief that wants to rob your house just reads that and says, okay, the best time to break into his house is every third Wednesday, or things like that. Which in actuality, actually, I don't remember the exact date, but it was about 5 years ago or so, maybe a little bit longer. But some lady was interviewing on the news that she got her house broken into, and that the people, the short version of this is she left to go out of town to go see a sick friend, and she left an email or posted an email like on Facebook to or a post on Facebook that all to her group of friends that she was going to be away to help this friend. Well, unbeknownst to her, one of the actual the actual attacker was a friend of one of her friends. But being a friend of a friend, that attacker had the ability to see her posts, this lady's posts. So they eventually caught the man, and they got, I don't know if they got most or all the stolen stuff back. But she couldn't figure out why that would happen. And oftentimes, we don't really pay attention to why, to the information, not knowing that just because you post it on there to your circle of friends, if any of those friends have any other friends, those friends, and in that chain of friends, they can see that information that you're posting. Shoulder surfing occurs when a user casually observes someone entering secret information without drawing attention to themselves. In the old days, kind of like I'm looking over your shoulder, seeing the telephone number you're dialing or the credit card number you're typing in onto the web or whatever. And that's one of the reasons why pretty much now, I don't know if I forget how long ago they started. Whenever you're typing in information like that, they change it to what's called password protected. So instead of the actual letters and numbers, you see those stars. Okay, so let's take a minute and do our quick little check, our activity check here. So which of the following is not, repeat, not a personal technique used by social engineer attackers to gain the trust of the victim? Providing a reason, project confidence, demand compliance, use evasion and diversion. So those are the four answers. So let's go back and look at the question. Which of the following is not a personal technique? So the key words are personal technique used by social engineering attackers to get the trust of the victim. So you can take a minute and look at these. Okay. And if you want, don't go back and again, don't just jump ahead to the next slide, because the next slide shows the answer, which is demand compliance. And the reason it's not personal, because demanding compliance is forceful and does not gain trust. So if I say, I want you to do this, and I'm very forceful, you might get think clearer and just say, well, no, I don't want to do that. You're bullying me. Okay, so someone wants to be able to convince you to do what they want to do, but they don't want you to feel bullied or threatened. So there's what's called perimeter defenses. Okay, some organizations have what's called an industrial camouflage to make the physical presence of a building as nondescript as possible. Most of the time, say for instance, example, if you go on campus, I think it's on Rayan Street, there's the AT&T central office building that has no signs, no windows, and just has a secure door. But it's actually the central place that gives telephone service to all of the Youngstown area. The 744, 745, and I think it's the 941 telephone exchanges. There's one in Boardman, there's one in each city has its own central office. And they're nondescript buildings, meaning that they don't stand out. So the perimeter defenses, they must be used to restrict access. They might be locked doors, windows, fences, gates, things like that. So you can see this type of defense includes barriers, security guards, sensors, security buffers, and locks, all kinds of different things. If you want to see a good example of that, if you go and Google Data Center, there's one video that actually gives you a tour of a Google Data Center, and it's narrated once it gets into it by the manager or the director. But it shows you how you have to have outer perimeter, outer physical barriers, security guards. They have infrared sensors, security buffers. They have retinal scanners and things like that. So fencing is usually a tall, permanent structure to keep out unauthorized personnel. Most modern perimeter security consists of a fence equipped with other deterrents, like what I'd say like barbed wire or other things like that. A bollard is a short but sturdy vertical post that's used in a vehicle traffic barricade to prevent a car from ramming into a secure area. I don't know if you've ever seen videos of like bollards being used in, like, say, London, in England, on the roads for the traffic. So when the light turns red, that bollard comes up to make sure the car doesn't run in through the intersection. When the light turns green, then the bollard goes down. So if any car tries to ram through, they would get stopped by that bollard. So you have human security guards who patrol and monitor restricted areas. They're on an active security defense. Remember, their job is to protect the site, the data center, or whatever it might be. 2 security guards may be required for a higher level of protection. They call them two-person integrity control. Often guards monitor activity captured by video surveillance cameras. Maybe a video camera is scanning or whatever, and it detects, say, motion and things like that. And then they can start recording and notify the security guard, and they can maybe send out someone to investigate. You also have high-end video surveillance cameras. They send alerts and begin recording. Drones, called unmanned aerial vehicles or UAVs, are being used for monitoring activity also. So now you get into the sensors. So the sensors include things like infrared sensors, microwave sensors, ultrasonic sensors, and so forth. Basically, it's an electronic device that can measure and detect whatever it's set up for. In this case, the first one's infrared in the surrounding area. The microwave sensor uses a high-frequency radio waves and functions similarly to like a radar. So when it detects something in the field that obviously would be blocking that signal, it can then map that there should be but there's something there that shouldn't be. You have your ultrasonic sensors measuring how far away a target or object is located. Okay. So here's an example of a pressure sensor. So maybe a pressure sensor might be placed somewhere in the building or on the floor, used as physical security, detect if a person has entered a restricted area or not. You also have in your security a security buffer. It serves as a protective barrier to provide an additional layer of security to keep intruders from entering areas, but still shows approved personnel. It might be like a building that has 2 door entries. You have the outer one, and then you have the inner one. So, like if you go into some of the buildings on Michelle Hall on campus, like Michelle Hall, Moser Hall, and so forth, you have a buffer, basically an area in there that if you breach that first one, it's highly unlikely that you would be able to then get through the second barrier. And that gets us to our next thing, what's called a man trap. It's a security buffer when a user showing the credentials to open the first door when the credentials can then be checked before a second door that they must pass through is unlocked. When you watch that Google video, you see that where they use that man trap like that. You open it up, you go into the first one by putting in your code, and then it does like a retinal scan on the person, and then if they pass that, then that second door opens up and they can go through. In areas where you have medium security it's needed, you can have a reception area. If you go to like a doctor's office and things like that, you have an outer area where people wait. If you have low security, you might have a generic waiting room that can be used instead. So here's an example of a lock. Electronic lock can be programmed to allow a certain individual code to be valid only at a specific time, and they can maintain a record of when the door was opened and by which code. So in preventing data leakage, that's important in information assurance. You want to make sure that no data is actually leaked out. And how do you leak out? Well, it's not like water coming out of a bag or container, but since some of these are radio frequency, a nearby device can pick up on that signal. So you remember from your networking, Wi-Fi is an open or a unguided media, meaning that it's just a radio signal, just like your AM/FM radio that receives a transmission. So they have the example of a Faraday cage and protected cable distribution systems. So here's an example of, we're going to talk about a Faraday cage. So electronic devices emit electromagnetic fields which can result in interference called electromagnetic interference, or EMIs. Unauthorized persons can then detect and read those electromagnetic signals. A Faraday cage is a metallic enclosure that prevents the entry or escape of an electromagnetic field. Lightweight and portable Faraday bags made of special materials can be used to shield portable devices. So here's an example of a Faraday cage. So you would be having the equipment inside that cage to protect it. So you go proceeding on, you have what's called a protected distribution system. It's a system of cable units used to protect classified information transmitted between two secure areas. Okay, so it might be between buildings, it might be from room to room. So you have two types of protected distribution systems. You have, the first is a hardened carrier, and the second is an alarmed carrier. The data cables are installed in a conduit that's constructed for specially electronic metallic tubing. That's for the hardened carrier. In an alarmed carrier, it's deployed with specialized optic fibers in the conduit that can then sense acoustic vibrations that occur when an intruder attempts to gain access to the cables, which then triggers that alarm. You also have your physical locks. In the old days, your computers were desktop computers that were very big and bulky, but still people could grab them and run with them. So they actually made it so that they were secured by a cable to the desk somewhere. Now, as more lightweight and laptops and mobile cables or mobile devices come along, it becomes easier to steal them. So you can see here, this laptop has a cable lock, so it's inserted in there, and when you set the combination, it basically it prevents itself from being detached from the laptop, and the other end of this cable would obviously be secured somewhere so that you can't just take the laptop and run with it. So let's talk about our sensors and our activity number 2 here. Which type of sensor is most appropriate for monitoring a large warehouse? Emphasis, large warehouse. Okay. Would it be microwave, infrared, XG, or passive RGB sensors? Okay. If you're not sure, eliminate it one by one till you get the answer. So your answer is going to be your microwave sensor. And why? Because if you remember, they were able to monitor large areas, such as a warehouse, to determine if an intruder has entered a restricted area. So again, your microwave sensor. You have your data controls. It's imperative to have adequate data controls in place to protect data. Why would that be the case? Well, you don't want somebody breaking in and stealing your company's data or your personal data, whatever that might be. Especially if that data contains maybe your medical information that's guarded by what's called HIPAA. So if somebody breaking into a hospital, they would try to get the patient's information, and that's HIPAA, and that information is protected by the HIPAA law. Your student information is protected by the FERPA law. We'll talk more about those later on. So protecting the data involves knowing the different classifications and types of data, the consequences of the data breach, and controls for protecting the data. So here are the different data classifications: confidential, private, sensitive, critical, public, and restricted. So confidential is the highest level of security down to, there's public, which is no risk of release. There's critical, sensitive, private, and restricted. Again, these slides are very informative, and you should print them out and keep them with you as like a study guide as you go along. Or if you're working in information technology, these provide great references. Okay, so let's talk about data. There's different types of data. Okay, you have regulated data, in which external stipulations are placed on it regarding who can see it and the data and what's context of it. So those are things covered by like your student data under the FERPA law, the hospital information or the patient information under the HIPAA law, and so on and so forth. You have intellectual property data. So when you have if you're an author or a musician, you create music or write a novel or whatever, that's your personal intellectual property. So it's an invention or work. That's the result of creativity. You have trade secrets. The secret sauce for Arby's or the secret sauce for maybe Burger King or McDonald's or whatever. That's the enterprise data that is undisclosed. Your legal information, generally factorial information about the law and the legal processes. And you have financial information, data about the monetary transactions of the enterprise. So you don't want those to be leaked out or compromised. So those are important. You also have what are called human readable data. So that means you can look at it and read it just like you would reading a newspaper. They can read it and interpret it. You have non-human readable data, also known as machine readable, data that can interpret in its native state and not readily understood by a person. So for instance, they talk about JSON, but you have things like if you took your Word document and you looked at the contents, it looks like a bunch of gibberish. If you took a PowerPoint or you took a picture, or whatever, and you looked at that and you dumped the file, it would look like a bunch of gibberish. That's why that's important. So that's your some classes, or they'll call that binary data. Okay, here's an example of a JSON, a portion of a JSON segment from a JSON file. JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. So there are consequences of data breaches. Well, the first one is, you're going to ruin your reputation. You're going to damage your reputation somehow. Well, we're not going to go with them because, if you have maybe it's a taxi company, we're not going to go with them because they always get a flat tire. Or we're not going to bank with them because they always get robbed. But in this case, we're not going to, we're going to think less of a company because their data gets stolen. Okay, so that actually happened back in 2017 to Equifax. I don't know if you're familiar with them or not. They are one of the 3 major credit reporting companies, and they're like the go-to place whenever you apply for like a loan, buy a house, buy a car, or whatever. They run your credit report. They get the data from Equifax is one of them, TransUnion, and Experian. But Equifax, they were breached. Okay, and so their reputation went down quite a bit. You might have IP theft, or your intellectual property theft, or fines of some kind. You were going to get fined because you didn't protect the data, or the data was stolen or compromised, or whatever the case might be there. So that's always why things like that are important. So when you look at your data, because this is what information assurance is beginning to talk about, you want to be able to protect that data. Okay. So you have several general considerations about data should be taken into account prior to creating data controls. So don't just go and create a data control for the sake of creating a data control. So the first thing to consider is the data state or its condition. So the data, in this case the state, has 3 different states. So you have data in process, data in transit, and data at rest. The data in processing is on the computer. For instance, say you have a website or database server, and the website's going to draw all the information from the database and send it back to the client who's asking for it. For instance, if you go and browse, search for something on Google, Google's going to look up the results and send them back to you. That process means it's going to query the Google server, and that Google data that's out there, that's data at rest. When Google fetches it and sends it back to you, that's the data in the data in processing is when it's being processed on the server or on the client. On its way to you, that's the data that's in transit. So data in transit is data from the server somewhere in process to the client requesting it. So another consideration is where the data is located. You have something called a geolocation. It's a term encompassing all techniques that identify the data's location. So for instance, if you go to like some of these websites like I don't know, Target or whatever, Walmart, oftentimes it'll ask you want to allow us to use your geolocation, because then what it'll do is it'll look on its database and find the nearby stores relative to your location, so you don't end up looking at a store, say, in California. Data sovereignty is the country's specific requirements that apply to data, and the data is subject to the laws of the country in which it's collected or processed. So, some techniques to enhance the protection of the data include the following. You have data minimization. That means if I maybe set up a key or some kind of code that I don't have to transmit the entire string of information. So maybe if you're looking for something on Amazon, and maybe you know the catalog number, and you just type that catalog number. Or if you're looking, say, like on YSU's banner, and you're registering for classes, and you know the CRN number or the catalog number, you don't have to type in the whole course name, like information assurance or problem solving, programming and problem solving, or whatever the case might be. You have data masking. You have tokenization. You have restrictions. And you have segmentation. All of these, they're enhancing the protection of the data. So let's do our knowledge check activity. This is the third one. Which data classification has the highest level of data sensitivity? Is it eyes only, sensitive data, private data, or confidential data? Remember, if you're not sure, eliminate it through a process of elimination. Okay? So when you look this over, if you actually go back and look at the answer in the slides, it's confidential data that has the highest level of data sensitivity. So confidential data. All right. So you have the opportunity to rate your competence of the following module objectives on a scale of 1 to 5, where 5 indicates that you're full confidence of your competence of that particular objective, and 1 indicates that you have very little confidence in your competence of that objective. So you should be able to define what's called social engineering and list the type of attacks, list different types of physical defenses, describe controls for protecting data. Those 3 things. Okay, and if you as you go through this, like any of these chapters, if you feel maybe this is your weak spot, go back and review it again. Don't just go through and do this once and try to take like the quizzes or the tests just cold, because you'll end up making mistakes and things like that. So you don't want to waste your opportunity to do well. So practice and learn this information. Okay, this is the summary of the chapter. Same things. Defining social engineering and list the type of attacks, list different types of physical defenses, and describe the controls for protecting data. Okay, so this is the end of chapter 2 for module 1. And make sure you read the material, do the quizzes and the homework, and I'll see you in chapter 3. Okay, have a nice day.